Why your family is not there for you in the way that matters the most, in the way that matters the most to you, in a way that is specific to you and for you. So, in episode 47, I spoke about a potential job opportunity, which I was really excited about, and it seemed promising. And in that episode, I talked about why I'm at a point where I'm very secretive with my family. I no longer share news like that, sharing with them that, hey guys, there's a potential job opportunity, and maybe let's pray about it, or maybe just like, keep the hope up for me. I no longer share most of my life, if not entirely, anything with my family. And with this potential job opportunity, which really looked promising, I didn't share it with them. And in that episode, I mentioned how I felt like if I didn't get the job, I felt like I had saved my face, in regards to my family, that if I didn't get the job, it would have been a good thing for me to not tell them, because then I wouldn't have to deal with the emotional confusion that goes around when I'm disappointed or upset at something. And I just feel like my family doesn't really seem to be there for me in those times where I really need them to be there for me, or in the way that I need them to be there for me. And I still find it a bit hard to explain some of the things that they do, because, for instance, if I had told them about this job opportunity, and because obviously today is a Sunday and the job is starting tomorrow, so obviously I didn't get the job, like it sucks. I'm so heartbroken. But had I told my family, and now that it's clear that I didn't get the job, they would not say, they would not be happy that I didn't get the job. Let me put it like that. Or maybe they would not show it outwardly that I didn't get the job. I don't know how to explain this. I really don't know how to explain this. And this is why I guess we need the profession of psychology, because it's more of a way. Sometimes people really do the right things and say the right things. In terms of reaction, sometimes their reaction is very underwhelming. Sometimes in a case where you feel like you need them to be there for you because you're heartbroken, or you bummed, or you're disappointed about something, and they seem to take it light, almost like it's not really a big deal. But sometimes they do really say the right things and maybe do the right things, or maybe give you a hug. That's very rare. But maybe sometimes we are not a very affectionate family. Like there's not really much of hugging and touching or kissing each other going around. But like obviously like kissing each other in a family kind of manner. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain that, but there are a lot of weird things happening nowadays. So, but we're not a very affectionate, especially physically, we're not a very affectionate family. And that makes sense, because all I talk about in these episodes is how my family is emotionally distant and disconnected and not really available emotionally, even though they're not aware of it. And so we obviously not going to be very affectionate people when it comes to like touching and hugging. We're not going to do that if emotionally we just can't even connect. And so had I told them what would be happening now, because I'm already bummed out and heartbroken that I didn't get the job. On top of that, I would be feeling a feeling of neglect, like my family wasn't there for me in a way that I would have liked them to be. And so, in as much as I'm really heartbroken that I didn't get the job, I'm still really glad that I didn't tell my family that there was a potential job that I could get, because somehow it feels like they don't know how to be there for me. And I think that's the best way to put it, that they seem to not know how to be there for me. Also, they seem to not know how to be there for themselves. And I think this is something I have to keep on reminding myself, that in as much as I experience this, and it's painful to experience this type of behavior and disconnect and distance from my family, it's not as personal as I think it is. It's really not, because even for themselves, I see at times where my own mother, who has cultivated this emotional distance and disconnectivity within this family, at times when maybe she's upset about something or disappointed about something or frustrated about something, I see her in her own life, in her own pain and disappointments, not really giving herself the grace that she should or the comfort that she should. And I also see us as her children sometimes not giving that to her. And I think for me, I'm naturally affectionate, but I've also restrained and limited my affectionate. I'm a very compassionate person. I'm loving, I'm very supportive, I'm very attentive. And it's only now that I'm actually able to fully acknowledge these traits about myself, because having these traits and then living with a family that does not have these traits, it has been very challenging to feel like I'm loving and I want to give of myself, but then live with people who are not as loving and giving of themselves, who know how to act accordingly, like acting in a loving way, in a loving manner, behave do the things that seem loving. But when it comes to really the core of it and what you really sense in your heart, it doesn't connect. Sometimes their behaviors and actions doesn't really connect to what you are feeling and sensing between you guys. I once made this example that just because your boyfriend buys you flowers, takes you out, buys you clothes, takes you, does all the things that some girls really like, it doesn't mean they really love you. Because sometimes actions, they don't really mean love. It's unfortunate because the saying goes, actions speak louder than words. But sometimes actions do not determine how someone really feels about you. And people can really perform. For me, it feels like performative love and not genuine love, where somebody is doing the right things that, somebody else might view as loving because they're doing the right things, because, they are performing. But it's not genuine. When you really strip away all these things and you really look at the person and you really look at the skeletons of the relationship, it does not have a solid foundation. And I think that's the same thing with my family. Like I always say, my mother has done everything necessary for us to raise us up, to provide for us. But when we really get to the core of it, there isn't genuine love in this family. There isn't a genuine connection and a genuine vulnerability that grows us closer together. It's all just performative, and it really is rooted in my mother, who has taken past experiences from her life and just went on with the same unhealthy patterns of not being loving and affectionate and compassionate and really there for people. But I think she really learned earlier on in her life to perform, to do the necessary things that make her look good. Honestly, sometimes I even see my mother being quote unquote good to other people. And now I just see that is just how, for her, I guess she survives. That is how she functions, because somewhere deep down inside her, I don't know if she's capable of doing something genuinely good for other people and not putting on a performance or not expecting to be praised, or it's performative. There's really no other way for me to put it. It's so performative. So even if for me I had told my family about this potential job, what would be happening now, it would be a performative reaction, which to them it seems natural. And I can't invalidate that for them, because for them it seems like a natural response. They've kind of learned this behavior of like, okay, this is what you do when you are supposed to be there for somebody, or when you're supposed to, seem happy for somebody or seem sad with somebody. It is learned behavior, and it sounds like psychological mumbo jumbo, but it's really not. It's really, really not, because based on my experience, which has been almost my entire life, I can say confidently this is how they operate and this is how their mind works. I have observed these people for my entire life, and I've even gotten to a point where I probably psychoanalyze them, which I think is not even healthy in my, like, in my own, for my own health. I think at a certain extent it's not even healthy for me to always be psychoanalyzing my family so much. But the reason I got to a point where I observed them and analyzed them so much, it's because I was always trying to reach them emotionally, always trying to get them to see me like I saw them, to be there for me like I was there for them. What I'm asking for from my family is not something I haven't done. And even though I know they wouldn't fully acknowledge this, but what I've always craved and wanted and just expected from my family, it's exactly what I've given them. The Lord is my witness. I have tried so much. I even overcompensated. I even did more than I should have in order to show that, okay, this is, for me, my mentality was that if I do it for you, then you're going to do it for me. And when it got to a point where I saw that, okay, I'm showing you that I'm there for you in hopes that you're going to be there for me. When I saw that that wasn't happening, I started the conversations of like, okay, maybe this is what I'm not happy with because, like everybody says, communication is the key. So I got to a point where I'm like, okay, it's fine. Like my family, they're not mind readers. So maybe it's time that I communicate my expectations and what I wish they would do, for me, like I do for them. But even that, it was not met with an understanding, response, and reaction. But I was only made to feel like I'm asking for too much. I was made to feel like I'm being too sensitive, too emotional, all the things that they usually make me feel whenever I bring something up for us to address. And this is just part of the unhealthy routine and pattern that is in this family, that even if you try to calmly and reasonably address something, you never really get the response that you hope for, or there never is a mutual point or a consensus that we get to, but it just ends up somehow seeming to divide us more. Like for me, communication, I understand the importance of communication. I understand why it is the key and it's significant in a relationship. But with my family, I really think it is the most useless thing for us. Communication, I think in this family, it is the most useless thing. Because instead of bringing us to a certain understanding and helping us all to really express ourselves, it's either, for example, my mother will take whatever you say personally as a personal attack or as a judgment on her parenting skills. Like it will never be a conducive conversation. It will never be a fruitful and productive conversation. And even if you think, even if for the slightest moment you actually think it was productive, you will find out later on by my mother bringing it up in another point, in another way, just trying to reinforce her point. And then you will see that, oh, it wasn't actually productive. So even if in the smallest chance where maybe I think like, okay, maybe they understood what I was saying, maybe they really heard me, I will later find out when my mother tries to bring it up, whether through scripture or through a certain story. And then I realized that, oh, she never really understood what I was saying. She never even tried to put herself in my shoes. Instead, she will bring it up another time as a way to just reinforce her point and just, kind of impose her point on me. And in a way, kind of force me by paraphrasing or rephrasing what we had already discussed, just to affirm her own point. And so in as much as I'm so bummed, I'm so bummed out about me not getting that job because I'm dealing with all these emotions with living with my family, living with an unhealthy family, being a young adult who feels the need to now be independent, be financially independent, be able to stand on my own 2 feet and have a stable job, a stable income. And on top of that, dealing with the emotional instability in this family, the emotional turmoil in this family. It is all just too much. But in at the end, I'm glad that I didn't tell my family about this. Because the one thing that I don't want to feel on top of me being heartbroken about not getting a job is me feeling like, okay, like maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe I should just get over it. Maybe I really shouldn't take it too hard. Or like sometimes my family will act indifferent. They will be just nonchalant. Like my ex once told me about this, that I have a very nonchalant personality where I just seem indifferent, where you can never really read me that whether I'm happy or sad about something, or like you can never really gauge my mood. And now I realize that this is something that I get from here at home, that this is somehow how they would respond to me. And this is somehow even myself included, because in as much as I really believe I've been the sanest and reasonable and compassionate person in this family, I can speak for myself, I can vouch for myself, because I am done believing the lies that they fed me, that I'm just as bad as they are. I might have made my mistakes. I might have maybe not treated them right at certain points, but I was never as bad as they were, because for them, there's nothing reasonable with them. Okay? So in as much as I've had my own stuff, I know I've been the sanest in this family, but I also realized that there were times between each other as a family, because of the unhealthiness that has been cultivated in this family, where we were probably indifferent towards each other, where somebody maybe shared good news or bad news, and it seemed like there was just this atmosphere of just like, oh, yeah, it's not a big deal. Like sometimes we wouldn't necessarily say those words to each other. Sometimes my mother or my sister would not necessarily say those words. Sometimes they would say them, just put them in a different way, but sometimes they wouldn't say those words. It's not like I would come with something that I'm really disappointed about and they would say, oh, it's not a big deal. Sometimes it would be just like, they don't give a care. Like it's like, oh yeah, that happened, so what? That would be the mood that I would get. They wouldn't say, oh yeah, so what? But you can read the room. Like a reasonable person who's able to sense, like you can read the room. You be like, but it's so frustrating. It's really, really frustrating that my own family just doesn't know how to be there for me. So much so that I am no longer even giving them the platform or opportunity to be there for me. That's where I've gotten, where they have failed me so much that I no longer even give them the chance to fail. So I don't tell them my expectations, my hopes, any potential opportunity, anything that I'm doing, anything good that's happening in my life, anything I'm excited about, anything I'm sad about, anything bad happening in my life. I don't share any of that anymore with them, because I don't want to give them the opportunity to fail to be there for me. And now I'm also not giving them my platform of me being there for them. And I think maybe it seems selfish, but I really don't care anymore. I'm at a point where, because I was someone who second guessed herself so much, and I still have those tendencies. It's a healing process. It's not going to happen overnight. I second guessed myself so much. Again, this is another trait of living in an emotionally disconnected family, living with a narcissistic mother and a narcissistic sister, an emotional mother, an emotional abusive mother, and an emotional abusive sister. This is a result of living in this family where I cared so much. I gave of myself so much. I expected so much and hoped so much that we could be vulnerable with each other, that we could really open up with each other and really be there with each other and build the kind of connection that you don't build with material things, that you don't build with doing certain things, but the kind of connection that you could be anywhere in the world. You could be in a cave, you could be under a tree, but by simply really opening up to each other and really being vulnerable with each other and really just listening to one another, understanding one another, that kind of connection that is built just by just being there with each other. Doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what you have, doesn't matter how much you have. And yes, I never want to take it for granted that I have a home. I appreciate that. I never want to take it for granted to be able to have an income, to be able to have food on the table. These are really important things. But at the core of it, human relationships, they are not built on these things. Yes, sometimes these things frustrate us when we don't have them, when you don't have a roof over your head, when you don't know what your next meal is going to be or where it's going to come from. And once you actually have these things, if we fast forward to a point where you're like, you know what, I used to worry about where I'm going to sleep or what I'm going to eat or what I'm going to wear. Once you fast forward and get to a place where you can afford those things, then what? Then what's left is human connections. Because yes, when we are in the midst of worrying about money or shelter or clothes or a job, all these other things that matter, like human connections or the emotional things or unhealthy things that happen between you and loved ones, they seem to be not that much of a big deal. Because what's clearly a big deal in that space is like, okay, what are we going to eat? But once you have what you have to eat, once you have a roof over your head, then these things, they resurface because they were always there. They resurface because relationship dynamics, they really, really, really matter above everything that we could ever have. And I just feel that I'll never have that with my family. I don't think so. I really don't think I'll ever have that with my family. And because I don't have that with my family, it makes it hard for me to believe that I can have it with anyone else. There's been recently a man in my life. I said that like I'm talking about a romantic relationship, but it's an older man who could be my father and who I actually consider to be my father at this point, that I've gotten to know. And I think God has led him in my life. He's been helping me with some of my creative stuff. He runs an NPO, and they help the youth. They help a lot of people, and he's just been really there for me. He hasn't been invasive. He hasn't been imposing himself. He hasn't been all up in my face, but he's just really been there. And I just want to hug him. I I feel like I'm explaining this so badly, but he's been so fatherly to me. And I'd even say motherly, because I never even experienced motherly affection. And he hasn't really done much. Listen, like, this man hasn't done much to a point where I'm saying like maybe he's spoiling me or he's doing this and that. Like, he's not even, I'm not even gonna say he's doing above and beyond to help me out with like my creative stuff or, just like keep me busy every now and again. He's just there, like he's just there. And it's almost like there's just this unspokenness between us where he's so open that even though he doesn't necessarily say it, but there's this atmosphere that says, you can talk to me if you need to talk, you know? And I think that gives me hope that even though my family never created that space, specifically my mother, never created the environment where I felt like I could just speak to her without her shutting me down or without her seeming not to know how to deal with my emotions or without her not making it about herself. She never created that space. So it gives me hope that even though I've known this man for a couple of months, but when I'm with him, I feel this environment where I feel like I could speak to him. And at first, I didn't even trust him because I have trust issues. And maybe it's because I did have an absent father. So I don't know what that looks like, obviously. But also, even though I had a present mother, she wasn't really affectionate. She wasn't really loving. She wasn't really understanding. She wasn't really open to understanding me. So it was kind of strange to meet someone like that. And because I see him dealing with a lot of other young people, I know this is not just how he is with me, this is just how he is. He just has that fatherly instinct. He has that parental instinct where he's just open, to listening, to be there, to helping. And going back to what I was saying about me wanting to hug him, what I've realized, one of my love languages is touching. Like, that's how I love. But because, like I said, in this family, we're not physically affectionate, we don't do the touching, hugging stuff, I always withhold doing that. There was a time where I would kiss my mother in the cheeks and I loved it, and she loved it too, interestingly. But she would always pretend like she didn't like it because my mother is emotionally confusing. That's just the best way for me to put it. Because, I would see that sometimes she would enjoy it. Maybe when I would go to sleep, I would give her a kiss. And sometimes she will act like I'm overdoing it. Like, this is another thing that goes around my family. Sometimes exaggeration is actually a form of abuse. Like, sometimes they will exaggerate something to a point where you just feel uncomfortable with doing it. Like, my sister would also make a big deal and, say like, oh, you love kissing mom too much, or you overdoing it. Like, sometimes they will exaggerate something so minor until to a point where you don't want to do it. There are a lot of little things that I no longer do. And because they're not really attentive people, they don't even notice when I stop doing those things because they will exaggerate it to a point where I just feel uncomfortable doing it. To a point where I just don't want to do it anymore because they keep talking about it or making a big deal about it. Like, so I even stopped giving my mother kisses goodnight. But that wasn't the only reason. It wasn't just the fact that they were exaggerating about it, even though I saw that my mother enjoyed it, but I think she also just didn't want to admit how much she was enjoying it because it's nice to be loved, okay? So me giving her goodnight kisses or whenever, it wasn't just goodnight kisses. I would just always kiss her whenever. It was my way of showing her love. And of course she enjoyed that because it's nice to be loved. It's nice. It's a nice feeling. That's what we all want, to be loved, for somebody to be affectionate with us, be loving with us. So it was the fact that they were exaggerating that made me stop giving my mother kisses, but also it was the fact that I was not getting it back. I think this was also at the time where I was starting to analyze our relationship dynamics, where I saw that how I was giving of myself, they were not opening up themselves and giving the same to me. And so that was another reason that I stopped being affectionate with my mother. And so now that I'm meeting this man, like that part of me, that part of my love language of touching and kissing is just, it's coming up. I just want to, because he's so cute, this man, this father, like he's my adopted father at this point and he doesn't really know it. He does call me his daughter, but I think I don't show how much sometimes I appreciate people or how much I love them because I have the experience of not being loved back by my own family. So when it comes to other people, it's hard for me to show that I appreciate them. Appreciate them is not necessarily the problem. I can show you that I appreciate you because I'm someone who's kind and polite. So I can show you that I appreciate you, but I cannot be overly loving because I'm afraid that that's going to be rejected. I'm afraid that that's not going to be reciprocated, just like it wasn't with my family. And so sometimes, like today, I was actually thinking about him and how he's been so there and so helpful in just little ways, man. It hasn't really been big things, but he has been there in the way that matters to me. Okay. He has been there in the way that matters to me. And the fact that he pays attention to my creativity, which is another thing that my family has failed to do. He appreciates my creativity. He's helping me to get it off the ground. He's helping me to do something about it. And he's not taking advantage of me in any way whatsoever. And I think because now I'm also like a bit mature and a bit older, I'm also being cautious. Like I'm taking baby steps. I'm not just like, fully embracing this man, which I've known for a couple of months. But I'm praying about it and I'm praying like, Lord, I want to be able to be loved. I want to allow people to love me because what has resulted from my own family not really being loving and not responding to my way of loving them, I fear letting people love me because I think they probably just gonna stop or they're gonna disappoint me, which is a fact of life. People are gonna disappoint you. That's just something I also have to learn to deal with because it's not like people sometimes intentionally disappoint you, but because I've dealt with so much disappointment from my family, from the expectations that I had from them, I'm afraid to be loved and I'm afraid to love. I I don't open up that much to people. And so I just keep thinking to this man that I just want to hug him and tight him squeezely like an old grandpa, you know? You know how like old people they get so cute when they like just don't even know what's really going on. And that's just like how I just see him like almost like a grandfather. Like he's a father but a grandfather at the same time. And I never had grandparents, so it's like a combination of both. And I just want to give him a good old squeeze because that's how I actually express my love. But I've really restrained that side of me of expressing love that way. Like a lot of people who have ever known me or even been friends with me, they would actually be shocked that my way of expressing love is by hugging or kissing or touching because I don't do that. Even with the closest of friends I've ever had, I really try to hold back because I'm afraid I'm gonna be rejected. I'm afraid I'm not gonna get a good response or a good reaction when I show that side of myself. So I don't do it. I seem very uptight when I'm like around other people, even people that I actually just really enjoy their company, but I seem uptight because I don't want to be too free in case maybe you don't like how I am. Again, this also goes back to how my family would overly emphasize on some of the things that I would do as if they not a good thing or as if they're embarrassing or this and that. And they would make me really self-conscious. And so even when I'm with people that I enjoy their company or maybe I feel free to be with them, but I don't show that I'm free. So to some people, it might seem like I'm uptight. It might seem like I'm not really comfortable, but I'm actually inside. I'm like, I enjoy your company, but I just physically can't show it because I've learned to restrain myself because of the emotional abuse that I've suffered from my mother and my sister, who always just scrutinized. Honestly, they just scrutinized my life. Like they would, I was always under a microscope with those two. It's like anything I did was just constantly analyzed. Well, I guess it takes one to see one because here I am also psycho analyzing them. I was always under a microscope. Like anything I did was always just, magnified, and there was always a comment about it. It's like putting your life on social media. You can expect that people are always gonna have something to say. But my life felt like with my own family, like anything I did, it would be like, whether they would over exaggerate, whether they would have a sly comment, whether they would try to take a jab at my self esteem. And so it made me really self conscious, and it made me really restrained and reserved, so much so that now I don't really know, or I'm not really free to show love. I'm not really free to express love. And by the help of God, I think I'll get there, because I would really love to be loving with my husband. I want to give him all the smooshes and the kisses in the world. I want to be loving with my kids. I want to hug my kids. Yes, just a simple hug. I want to hug my kids. I want to touch my kids' faces. I want to kiss them. I want to show them that I love them, like by using my hands, using my body, hugging, like it, like being physical doesn't have to be about sex. Like, it really doesn't have to be about sex. You can really get physical with the people you love, and not just your significant other, everybody around your life, friends, family, partner, touching them. It is just one of the most precious ways to connect.